Go ahead and get started. Thank you all for being part of the Kiwanis meeting, Kiwanis Club of Indianapolis meeting this afternoon. If you are a guest or you're a member and you would like to, please use the chat to introduce yourself. I am also enjoying some really amazing mac and cheese that has tater tots in it. So if you want to share what you have for lunch today, feel free to do that as well. In lieu of our invocation, I wanted to share a quote from Buddha that Kirsten actually includes in her book and was meaningful to Hsieh. It says, thousands of candles can be lit from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. I thought that was important for us to remember. A couple quick club announcements as we get going. We appreciate all of our members who have recommitted to Kiwanis for this year through paying dues. If you are not receiving the weekly newsletter by email and you want to update your contact information, please let Kelly know or shoot me a note. We'll make sure that happens. You can also find details of the coming month's activities at indykiwanis.org. Feel free to share Facebook events with your friends, your colleagues, invite them to these meetings, whether they're in person, Zoom, or special events. And if you miss an opportunity to connect, videos are posted on our YouTube channel of these calls. I know there are a few folks that had hoped to make it today and have committed to watching the recording. As a club, we're being mindful of our role in offering service leadership. If you guys don't mind making sure you guys are on mute, please. We're being mindful of our role in offering service leadership to partner organizations such as the Salvation Army. You'll find two options for November and December at indykiwanis.org/service. Among those, please register to ring the red kettlebell. There are 8 time slots remaining on Fridays, December 3rd from 6 to 7, the 9th from 4 to 5 and 6 to 7, and Friday, December 16th from 5 to 6 and 6 to 7. Again, sign up sheet is at indykiwanis.org/service. And then we have 3 ways to support Adopt an Angel. You can adopt an angel through December 4th. You can volunteer to sort gifts November 14th through 17th and December 1st through 9th. And you can volunteer to help with their distribution at their Fountain Square location December 13th and 14th, or at Eagle Creek on the 15th and 16th of December. I'm going to quickly turn things over to Chuck if you want to give us a quick update on the football program that's coming up.
Yeah, thanks, Trina. Well, you know, as many of you know, we are back at the invitation of the Indianapolis Colts. We are partnering with them again this year at their facility for the 66th, I think, annual football banquet, Kiwanis Football, Marion County Football Banquet, where we honor student athletes and for their academic prowess. In fact, we have a meeting this afternoon with many of the with the 2 or 3 of the Colts promotional department, where we're going to do some sort of final planning for the banquet. I think it's what, Kelly, 4:30 to 5, I think. And so we're excited about that. And so we'll know a little bit more about that, maybe able to make an announcement next week as far as what that'll include. You know, my committee, I had the committee, but Bill Du Bois and Rob Schlegel, Roger Cummings have been helpful in organizing all of the various things that need to be done to organize that. We hope to have maybe as many as, I don't know, 300 at the banquet, and we're going to try to keep it to an hour to an hour and a half this year. But it's when you have that many names to call out and honor student athletes, it can get lengthy. So we'll have more. Remember, it's It's December 1st, Thursday, December 1st, out at the Colts facility on 56th Street at the Gridiron Hall. And we've got table sponsorships available for $200 a piece. And of course, all the proceeds go to the Kiwanis Foundation. Did I miss anything, Kelly? Need to add to that? Trina, can you think of anything?
I think you hit it all. December 1st, buy your tickets.
That's right. That's right.
Thank you.
Get your tickets.
I appreciate all of your work, Chuck, and all of your committee's work.
Sure.
Kelly, thank
Great.
you for supporting this great program.
You bet.
So our foundation awards grants annually in excess of $25,000. Thank you to Jean Ann for chairing that committee this year, and to Karen Burns for supporting her in a co-chair role. I am pleased, though, to welcome Theresa Brun, the Executive Director of Brooke's Place, to provide a quick recap on the $2,500 grant that they received during our last grant cycle. Theresa, would you like to share for just a moment?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you so much for the opportunity to come and first and foremost say thank you so much for the community grant. It was used specifically to support our ongoing support group program. And I do have just a 4-minute video that sort of pictures say it much better than words.
Ongoing peer-based support groups are a little different than what our traditional support groups might look like. What you might see in TV or movies, where everyone's just sitting in a circle talking about their feelings. We do that sometimes, but most of the time with kids, it's playing outside or going to the volcano room, doing activities, doing arts and crafts, being with therapy dogs, and really just surrounding ourselves with people that are experiencing something similar to us.
My husband passed away. His name was Joe, and he passed away in January of 2015. It was completely unexpected and out of the blue. And the first thing that came to mind after the initial oh no was how I was going to help my son, Walter. He's 9 now. He was 2 at the time. And I immediately contacted a child psychologist in town that I knew who recommended Brooke's Place.
Brooke's Place has provided for me and my family a space, a safe space and place for my children to be able to properly process their grief concerning losing my mom, their grandmother. And it gives them a place to have an outlet and to be able to express themselves. It gives me a sense of peace and calm to where it's not just all on me, having to figure out how to help them properly process their grief.
It's become like a second family for us. When we had the pandemic and we couldn't come, he was always talking about wanting to see his Brooke's Place friends.
It's always has just been there for me, and like they've always helped. It always is like some place that I'm used to being there.
It is very safe, and it makes me feel like I'm not alone.
One thing I enjoy is how we all get together and everyone's comfortable enough to talk about their loved one who has died, and they get to share that with us, and we get to know more about the person.
I really love seeing the dogs. It's just like every Brooke's Place day, like I cannot say no to them at all.
I like the way how we color and draw, and I like how some days it can be very calm and peaceful and other days it isn't. I've gotten better with the volcano room over the years.
It's just kind of a place that you can like let your anger and emotions out. There's music, it has padded walls so you can like run into walls. They have giant punching bags. There's newspaper covering the floor and bubble wrap that you can rip up and take pool noodles and whack the wall. It's really noisy.
They've helped us so much. Just being able to sit in a room of adults and everybody's lost someone. And Brooke's Place has been there for us through every single moment of it. The events are amazing. The people are fantastic, and they're like another family. So that's kind of it.
It was a quick hit and it was a heavy hit. And so I want them to know, that it's okay to cry, it's okay to express how they feel, it's okay to be frustrated, and Brooke's Place has provided that for our family.
Can I have a hug? Thank you.
The ongoing support groups is one of 4 different programs that we offer. And as you may have seen in some of the visual that you saw, that we have 116 program nights like that each year. And we serve approximately 500 people each month. Most of them children, teens, and young adults, but we do provide a support group component for the adults as well, because they need support in order to be able to help their family members as caregivers for whoever they're taking care of or bringing to the support group meeting. So those program materials are critical to us to be able to have items for our expression room, which is arts and crafts supplies, for the volcano room, which is a room where children can really act out their grief in a healthy and safe way. When you see this video, you will see children ripping up phone books. There really is still a reason for phone books, and our children use them to rip them up or bubble wrap. There are, for instance, balls called thumb balls, where they can throw the ball, and wherever their thumb lands, there's a question on there, maybe about their loved one who died. And so it's just an opportunity for them to share their grief in a healthy and supportive way. For the children who come to Brooke's Place, what we hear often from them is, when I come here, I don't feel alone. I feel safe, I feel supported, and I feel understood, because the children that are here with me also had a loved one who died. And we encourage them to speak the name of their loved one who died, to share anything they want to share about that person, whether it's a favorite color or a favorite meal. We do tip time activities that give them the opportunity to really keep in their hearts and in their minds their loved ones who died. Children who come to Brooke's Place come on average about 14 months. But what we tell them is that once you're a Brooke's Place family, you're always a Brooke's Place family. So we have had children. We had a call a little while ago from a 15-year-old girl whose mom called to say that she had come to Brooke's Place when she was 10 and 11. She closed, but she got her driver's permit. And it was her father who was supposed to teach her how to drive, and it was her father who had died. So she came home off the bus and said, I need to go back to Brooke's Place. So her mom called, and we were able to re-engage her in our programs for kids. And we put them in groups by age. So she's with other teenagers who are experiencing, and many of them, the same thing. November is Childhood Grief Awareness Month. This is a significant issue. Indiana is the 12th highest state in terms of the rate or incidence of childhood grief. We have over 75,000 children just in central Indiana alone. So we get a lot of phone calls for our therapy services, for our ongoing support groups, for our camp that we do each summer. We do have wait lists, but fortunately, we've been able to offer some wait list activities for those families and to reduce those as much as we can, so that we can get the families engaged in a way that is supportive for them. We do have a breakfast coming up on November 17th, where this video will be showed as well at that breakfast. You can join it virtually. If you want to go to our website at brooksplace.org, you can sign up to attend the breakfast. Our in-person breakfast is sold out, but we are offering the virtual live stream option. So we would love to have any and all of you join us for that as well. So we are so appreciative for your grant and want you to know that for all of the children that we support, we're just very grateful.
Thank you so much for sharing that, for all the work you're doing. You're making my heart so happy. I'm glad that we can be a tiny part of the impact that you're having. I'll turn things over now to Graham Honecker, who will run us through some of the upcoming programs that we have on the calendar, and then introduce our speaker. Graham.
Give me just a second, pulling these up here. Okay. In addition to today's great program we have, I'm actually just gonna, because I want to give Kirsten a lot of time. November the 17th, we have Ted Green coming to talk about his new film, The Carl Erskine Story, The Best We've Got, which is just a fabulous film on Carl Erskine, an Indiana native, and the last of the Brooklyn Dodgers fabled Boys of Summer teams. Really goes into the relationship that he has with his son, who special needs individual, and his relationship with Jackie Robinson, which is just a great story of pioneering. Jackie Robinson, a pioneer in terms of race relations in sports. So really looking forward to Ted. Trina, anything else? I'm only seeing that on my agenda here. I know we've got a lot of other great ones coming up.
They're all at indykiwanis.org. So yes, mark that on your calendar, mark football, and we'll take you from there. You're good.
Excellent. Okay. And now, are you ready for me to introduce our speaker?
Yes, please.
Okay. This is a real thrill for me. If you weren't on the call earlier, I was out in La Jolla, California this summer, and I'm a bookstore junkie, and went into this great little bookstore right off of the ocean and saw Kirsten's new book, Happy at Any Cost. And I've long been a student of Zappos. Also, my family's long been a customer of Zappos. We have them arriving quite often, it seems, on our doorstep. But the founder, Tony Hsieh, a real entrepreneurial genius, had long been a student of, wrote my MBA thesis paper on. So when I saw Kirsten's book, and I'll let her talk about the aftermath of what's happened, I just grabbed it, read it in about 3 days, actually before I got back on the plane from California, and reached out to her and asked if she would talk about the book today. Not from the lens of a great startup entrepreneurial story, but also really mental health in the pandemic. And sadly, this is a case study for the sad stories around mental health that we've had. So we're honored to have her here today. I'm going to briefly read her bio. Kirsten is an enterprise reporter for the Wall Street Journal, where she has worked since 2012. This role involves investigative coverage on stories that require some extra digging. She has received more than a dozen national awards for her work, including a Pulitzer Prize finalist citation and a Loeb Award. Her reporting has ranged from exposed screening gaps at the children website care.com to showing how Google's secretive algorithm works. She has written an in-depth profile of Twitter. Anything going on with Twitter these days? Of Twitter's former CEO, Jack Dorsey, detailed a stalking scandal at eBay, and chronicled the mishandling of sexual harassment allegations at the video game giant Activision. Early in her career at the Wall Street Journal, she was an enterprise finance reporter based in New York, where she exposed the flawed rating system of popular mutual funds, chronicled the downfall of the bond king. Bill Gross uncovered a sexual harassment scandal at the mutual fund giant Fidelity Investments, and exposed the fast-growing predatory green energy loan program that took advantage of the elderly. No shortage of interesting stories here, Kirsten. Her first book, The Lost Bank, was named the best investigative book of 2012 by the Investigative Reporters and Editors Association. She grew up in Encinitas, California, graduated from Cal Poly, and now lives in the San Francisco Bay Area. Kirsten's going to give a little background on the book, and then we're going to open up for Q&A. I sent you all an article that I expected you all to read in preparation for this. So Kirsten, welcome. We're really honored to have you. Know how busy you are, and thank you for joining us from the West Coast.
Thank you so much for having me. You clearly got your hands on the extended bio there. So thank you for that introduction. And it's funny because Twitter, that's like all we're working on out here in San Francisco, right? There's like 15 reporters working on that like Twitter Elon Musk story. So yeah, I love it. Thank you guys so much for having me. I love to talk to readers in different groups. That's my favorite part of this. So I really appreciate it. I think what has worked well is for me to actually explain like what my job is, because that will explain how the heck I got on this story. So Graham did a great rundown of some of the projects I've worked on over the years, but I have a really interesting role at the Wall Street Journal where I really rove around. So a lot of reporters have a specific coverage area, right? Like out here, we have someone covering Facebook, someone covering Apple. I kind of just rove around, and when something big is happening that needs a deeper investigation, for example, possibly now Musk buying Twitter, I will jump in. So, and by the way, I'm actually from San Diego, California. The little town Encinitas is just north of the city that Graham mentioned. So I had spoken at that bookstore at some point where he got the book. So this is a funny sort of sequence of events. But last year, gosh, no, it must have been 2020. I was in the car driving back home from San Diego with my family after Thanksgiving. So gosh, about almost 2 years ago now. And the pandemic was in full swing. And it's about an 8-hour drive from San Diego to Berkeley, where I live. I'm in the city today in San Francisco, where our office is, but I live in the Bay Area. And so I'm in the car and I'm scrolling through the headlines, the news headlines, and it says that this entrepreneur, Tony Hsieh, has died in this house fire. And this is a terrible thing to admit, but it's because I jump into stories. I actually didn't immediately know who that was, but my husband, who was driving, said, Tony Hsieh, oh my gosh, he was the CEO of Zappos. He was like this amazing entrepreneur. He was very young, only 46. So right after I get back, I get a call from my editor, and he was like, did you see that story about this really mysterious house fire in Connecticut that Tony Hsieh died in? And I said, yes, we were just talking about that. My husband had read his best-selling book, which I'm sure many of you, including Graham, of course, have read, about happiness. It's called Delivering Happiness, and it's all about his mantra of how you should bring happiness to employees and customers. So a lot of business people are sort of disciples of Tony Hsieh and his work. So my editor said, we've got to find out what happened to him, because he died in this house fire and it was in Connecticut, and Tony Hsieh lived in Las Vegas. So how is he even in this other state? So I got paired with Catherine Hsieh, who's another reporter here at the Wall Street Journal. She actually covers Las Vegas and gambling. And the two of us just started really digging into it. And what we found was just a heartbreaking, I mean, I've done some heartbreaking reporting over the years, but this was just one of the most heartbreaking stories I've ever worked on. And you know, I'll kind of give you the synopsis, and then I'd love to answer questions, and I'll talk a little bit about the book as well. So we quickly realized that Tony Hsieh had kind of spiraled into a series of mental health issues, exacerbated then by drug use in the last year of his life. And he had moved from Las Vegas, his longtime home, to Park City, Utah, and had been like bringing people out there. But he, in this last year, was so, so affected by his ketamine use and his mental health issues that this group of enablers started surrounding him and spending his billion-dollar fortune. And in the end, he had traveled to Connecticut basically to visit a friend, and was in a shed in the middle of an East Coast winter, and had a propane heater. No one will ever know what really happened in that shed because it was just him. It hasn't been ruled a suicide, it's been ruled accidental, but you know, he lit a propane heater with a lot of drugs around. And he was alive when the firefighters pulled him out, but died 9 days later. So it was a tragic end to this really amazing figure. And so Catherine and I spent a lot of time looking at that last year. And from that arose our book, Happy at Any Cost, which came out in March now. And that was more fun for me because in the course of our reporting for the newspaper, we really were focusing on what happened to him in this last year. But then we got to go back and really understand what an amazing business figure he had been, which Graham knows about if he wrote his thesis on Tony. So the reason the story was so tragic is because he was such an unusual entrepreneur and CEO, so far out of bounds from the classic, you know, hard driving CEO or Silicon Valley sort of smarmy type that you hear about so much. So Tony was, he kind of like got his start in the 90s. He had this really like popular startup that he sold to Microsoft. So he was like a millionaire by the time he was like 25. And during the dot-com bust, he was in the Bay Area and he ended up kind of taking over the shoe company Zappos. And if you guys can cast your mind back to like 2000, you know, nothing was online, right? I mean, selling shoes online was like this revolutionary idea. And Tony really got it though. He understood that people would want to buy shoes online and he believed in the business model. And it grew so quickly, in part because he had this very unusual philosophy about the workplace, which was that workers should be happy. So, you know, now this will not, again, sound unusual because you kind of hear this at tech companies especially, but, you know, people decorated their offices. They had happy hours, they had parties, they had, you know, they were playing paintball in the hallways, they hung out together, they cut the ties off visitors that came in like wearing suits and like hung them up to make fun of people who were like so stuffy. So it was just, you know, I talked to this one Wall Street analyst I remember for the book, and he was like, it was just like walking into Willy Wonka's chocolate factory, the Zappos offices. It was just crazy. And Tony had sort of centered on downtown Las Vegas is where he wanted to grow this company. Now, I don't know if you guys have ever been to Vegas. I had really only been to like the Strip, right, with all the casinos. This is not that. Downtown Las Vegas is this kind of corner of the city that often tourists don't even go to. And Tony separately was like, I want to redo this area and bring in art and fun. His whole thing was about fun. He always wanted to have fun. He was super into Burning Man, that festival in the Nevada desert. And so he brought in all this art from Burning Man to downtown Las Vegas. He was building Zappos up. He wrote his book in 2010 and took a bus tour around the country. Another thing he was really well known for that really caused a lot of like press and newspaper articles and features was customer service, which seems crazy, but he really believed in customer service. He had everyone at the company trained, thousands of employees, to work the phones. And he worked the phones too, especially during holidays. And if you called and talked to someone at Zappos, they talked to you for 2 hours about like not even shoes. You know, they let you return shoes a million times. Tony didn't actually care about shoes. He actually just cared about people, which was what was so unusual about him. So the problem though is he built up this persona, right? He kind of turned into this, I want to say like a business god. Thousands of people every year were flocking to Zappos. It had since been purchased by Amazon because Jeff Bezos was so impressed with Tony, but was letting him just like run it separately in Las Vegas. And everyone wanted to know how Tony had done it. they were visiting him. You know, he got so popular. He had all these celebrity friends and all these like admirers, and he was living in like an Airstream trailer park, even though he was a billionaire, you know, and he had like llamas walking around, and he was just this like cool, crazy CEO, and so kind and giving, would just like give you the shirt off his back, you know, was constantly funding other people's startups. And so on the surface, it all looked great. But when we really began to like unpeel the layers in the book writing process, we discovered that really early on, Tony was masking quite a few mental health issues, including severe social anxiety, likely autism, likely depression. He also had a form of facial blindness, which means he couldn't really recognize people a lot. I mean, think of that when you are a CEO, right? Talking to a ton of people, when your whole life is built around communal living. And by the time he wrote his book, Delivering Happiness in 2010, he was covering up a lot of those issues with drinking. He started drinking quite heavily, and he drank in a way that made it hard for anyone to like pin him on it. So he integrated alcohol into the culture at Zappos, right? Which at first was okay, but then definitely went sour at the end. I mean, so people were used to seeing him like maybe take a shot at a meeting, or, you know, the Zappos threw these huge, amazing parties all the time, and there was tons of drinking there. So it was normal that he would be drinking. So even his close friends, because Tony never married or had a family, he was just surrounded by all these friends, were able to kind of look past it, right? And he went along that way for a decade or more. And then what happened is the alcohol stopped working. And by the end of 2019, he turned to ketamine, which I don't know if you guys know much about that drug, but it's typically used for medical procedures. It makes you kind of like it gives you like a very brief high, and then you have to keep, you know, taking some to have it keep going. And so he thought this could help him. It ended up spiraling out of control. His friends, after many months, finally convinced him into rehab. By now it's like early 2020 in Park City, Utah. He stays only 2 weeks, leaves, gets out of rehab, and the pandemic hits. So then he's not only not finished his rehab, but now he's isolated in a new town, Park City, Utah. And he's like, you know, he's used to being surrounded by hundreds of people. So quickly again, he's starting to use more drugs. He starts using nitrous oxide. That's whippets. That's like usually known as a party drug, where you get a really quick high inhaling, and you have to keep going to get this high over and over. He starts losing weight. His mental health issues are exacerbated. He starts buying all these properties around Utah, these mansions. You know, he's clearly like not in the right state of mind. He thinks he's going to solve world peace, and he's going to create this kind of utopian community in the hills of Utah. He gets all these like kind of hangers on to move out with him, because his true friends, you know, this is like mid 2020, right? Like everyone, a lot of cities and states are still hunkering down because of the pandemic. So his true friends don't move with him. So he gets all these people that are just like spending his money on crazy random things. A separate estate battle over all the spending is still ongoing. And in the end, his really good friend, the singer Jewel, I don't know if you guys know her, tries to save him, shows up in Utah and sees what a terrible state he's in. And it's just too late. And by that point, he has flown to Connecticut to visit a friend and ends up in that shed. So it really is, and I'm going to stop talking and let you guys answer some questions. For us, for Catherine and I, we really hoped this book to not just be about Tony Hsieh. Of course, it's about him, highlighting his amazing life and career and what happened to him, but it's really a broader story about what happens when you ignore mental health issues. And also what happens when you're just so focused on happiness. Tony, because he had a very challenging childhood, he was the child of immigrants, and he was constantly studying. There's very little fun. He kind of swung the other way, and so wanted everything to be happy all the time, and everyone should be happy no matter what. And that's why we kind of named the book, you know, Happy at Any Cost, because he was driving so hard for that happiness all the time that he wasn't even looking at himself, right? So I hope you guys will read the book, and you'll see that we try to broaden it out so it can be a reflection of not just Tony, but kind of all of us in the process. So yeah, that's pretty much it. And I'd love to hear any questions from you guys about anything, you know, the book writing process, the journal, Tony Hsieh, all of that. I'm here for it.
Kirsten, was there history of mental illness in his family?
That's a really good question. The short answer is I don't know. And the reason for that is the family, for a variety of reasons, has not participated in any interviews. We've never talked to them, unfortunately. They're very private, as just on the face of it. They're immigrants from Taiwan. They wouldn't normally speak about anything, but then there's been this separate estate battle going on. Also, one thing I didn't kind of cover is one of the tragic things that happened at the end was Tony's own brother was actually out there in Park City, not really helping, and in fact enabling him in spending his money. So they're kind of conflicted also. So we just don't know. I assume there must have been, though, to be honest.
Yeah.
Kirsten, I've got about 1 million questions, so I'm going to try not to monopolize it. But one of my thoughts, a struggle for a lot of people, is when they achieve massive success at such a young age.
Yes.
And he did, you know, and when Amazon bought him out, I think he was early 30s, maybe. Again, like you said, he was a multimillionaire by the time he was 24.
That's right.
When you think about happiness, does it just plateau when you've hit everything you could potentially do in your career at such a young age that you start feeling a bit empty?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Graham. I think that definitely happened with Tony. I think towards the end, when he started having issues in 2019, I think that was in part driven because by that point, it had been 10 years since he had sold Zappos to Amazon, since he had written his best-selling book, and he was kind of still the CEO of Zappos. And so he was like, what am I going to do next? Like, what's going to be the next big thing? And he really looked up to people like Elon Musk, and he saw like Elon Musk doing all this amazing stuff. And like, why am I not doing that? Right. So that definitely played into it for sure.
I'm going to keep going unless you guys jump in. I mean, I got a ton here.
Okay.
I'm curious what happened to his wealth. I mean, he was, I think, had almost a net worth of $1 billion, and he never struck me as the type of guy to maybe draft a full estate plan. Do you have any sense of what happened to his wealth since his passing?
Oh, it's so sad. So when he, in those last 6 months of his life in 2020, so he didn't have a will. He was only 46, so maybe that's not so unusual. But for someone that wealthy, I think he should have had a will. In those last 6 months, when he was so clearly having mental health breakdowns on a variety of drugs, he started making all these contracts with people for crazy stuff, like I said, on sticky notes that were just like posted all over his house. And so what's happening now, still 2 years later, is his dad, who is the head of the estate at this point, is trying to sort through those sticky notes, which and decide, does this constitute a contract? And then sadly, what's also happening is some of the terrible people who got contracts based on sticky notes are claiming they're owed millions of dollars from the estate. So there's this battle going on about estimating even what he had left. The last figure I kind of heard was like 500 million, but there's so much money missing. There's so many people claiming they're owed money. So it's just a giant mess. So get a will in place is the moral of that story, I guess.
I was wondering, for people who have never ordered shoes online, I have, but could you give us a sense of how big his company was when Amazon bought them, whether it's how many employees they had or what it was worth, or just a sense of size, because it was pretty amazing.
Yeah, it was amazing. And it's still, you can still, to be clear, order from Zappos. In fact, I kind of tried out their customer service for the book, and it's still very good. So when Amazon bought them, you know, they weren't actually that big. If you think about the size of Amazon, they had about 1,500 employees. I can't off the top of my head. We have their sales figure in the book. Amazon was really buying them for the workplace experiments, to be honest, less about, because by that point, 2009, you know, Amazon was in full swing. You can buy shoes on Amazon at that point. They were basically buying like Tony Hsieh. Another thing I didn't mention is one of his really big workplace experiments in the latter years was all about like leveling the playing field at work, and there were no bosses, basically. So it was another thing they were sort of trying out. But yeah, I can't remember off the top. It wasn't that big though. It was a pretty small company for Amazon.
Kirsten, as I recall, a big part of the negotiation was that Zappos would be able to keep their culture.
Exactly.
You know, that Hsieh was only willing to make the deal if they were able to keep their cultural customs in place.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, listen, Tony Hsieh did not care about shoes. Like, he even said this, like he could have been selling like, I don't know, anything, coffee cups, you know, like he didn't care about the product. He really cared about the people and the workplace experiments and, you know, things he could try out to kind of grow the business in unusual ways. So that's definitely what he wanted to keep doing. What happened in latter years though is, and this definitely contributed as well to his kind of spiraling downhill, it's Amazon was like, okay, guys, we've owned you for 10 years, like show us the money. And not surprisingly, you know, Tony had like 18 workplace experiments going on, and you know, Amazon would ask for a report with like figures like profit, revenue, you know, normal financial statements, and Tony would be like, okay, yeah, but here's this other thing we're doing over here. He would try and like, you know, stuff it with all his like trials. But at some point, Amazon was like, you guys need to actually show us you're making money over there. And they weren't really, is the problem. They weren't hitting their growth targets. So he was kind of under the gun towards the end, which he did not care about meeting growth targets. So.
It's surprising given the number of shoes my household has ordered in the last couple of years.
Exactly.
I've got another question, again, maybe going deep into psychology. I'm married to a psychologist, so I'm not one myself. That's going to be another book that I write in the future.
Totally.
His the cultural dimension of his upbringing, and he talked about this in his first book, that growing up in an Asian American family, it was expected that he was going to be a doctor or an engineer.
Mm-hmm.
And I almost wonder if no matter how much success he had, the fact that he didn't go into one of those professions still in his mind, I don't want to say he thought of himself as a failure, but there was always maybe this thinking that he didn't meet his parents' expectations.
Listen, I've armchair psychologized this a ton too. That's definitely possible. I personally think the thing that affected him more, because I think his parents, especially his dad, after he got so famous and so popular, did acknowledge that he was like a raging success. And in fact, it was his younger brothers that suffered under the shadow of that, specifically his middle brother. I think more what affected him about his childhood was the extreme lack of fun, just the seriousness of having to study all the time, learning 5 instruments, learning 5 languages. I remember I was reading this like very old New York Times story about him, and the Times had asked him, what's your favorite like childhood memory? And he said something like, the time my mom allowed us to have trick-or-treaters over on Halloween. Like, that was it, you know? And he spoke about how he couldn't go to his junior high dances because he was taking the pre-SATs. And I think that was more of the psychological effect than, I'm not saying, you know, I could never interview Tony, so I don't know. And I don't think he would actually have told us because he was very private about stuff like that. But I think it was the fun aspect more than the parents not acknowledging him as a success.
You mentioned that he had a number of enablers or hangers-on that kind of encouraged his behavior, if you will. Do you know whether he sought help himself or whether there was other people that were very concerned and maybe wanted to have an intervention or something like that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I didn't talk about that. So I actually myself learned quite a lot about addiction in this process. I spent some time at the rehab facility he was at in Park City, speaking to the doctors there. I've luckily not had to deal with that in my own personal experience. And he was just, especially in that last year, just the classic definition of an addict. And so the problem with that is, one, he's not himself acknowledging that he has a problem. In fact, he would be going around telling people, I'm in a metamorphosis. And at the end of this metamorphosis is going to be sobriety, which, you know, not to excuse any of the people around him. I always give that caveat, but getting help for an addict is extremely hard. And Tony was always someone that was kind of crazy. Like when he was developing Las Vegas, he had crazy ideas too. And so I think it was easy to pass off that craziness a little bit for the people around him. In the end, the only people that really tried to stage an intervention were first his parents. In the summer of 2020, really tried. They hired a professional interventionist. We go into this in the book to go out there. But the problem was Tony had a ton of money. So he hired literally 30 security guards to guard his mansion, wouldn't let her in. So that failed. And then the singer Jewel came out to visit, was just completely, we go into this in detail too, shocked by the state of him, started like working behind the scenes to find some way to like get him to a hospital so they could put like a 72-hour psychiatric hold on him, and then possibly like get him help that way. But it was just too late and he would never agree to go to the hospital. So it was just, and then the people around him were just so kind of like stuck in his aura that they couldn't really see that he was falling off this cliff, or they saw and they just ignored it, right?
Thank you.
Kirsten, Alfred Lynn was his original business partner. They founded Link Exchange back in when they were in their early 20s. I don't know if you covered this in the book, but it seems they drifted apart. Am I off on that, or just he it didn't seem he was in the inner circle, Tony's inner circle, by the time he started having these problems.
No, that's right. You're totally right. So he left Zappos like kind of a decade before and moved back to the Bay Area from Las Vegas. So really, he kind of saw the start of the problems when no one else really did, but he was removed. So Alfred, though, was part of a group of friends that helped the family on that intervention attempt at the end. They had like 10 people on that intervention attempt, including the specialist, trying to figure out like how to get to Tony, but none of them were successful. And the other thing is, like, it's hard to remember this now, but remember it was the pandemic. So a lot of areas, especially the Bay Area, was just completely locked down. So no one wanted to travel. No one, you know, it was hard to even get people to go out there. So.
Sorry, we do have a question in the chat. Zappos is a commitment to good. Beyond great customer service, it carries products created by socially conscious companies. Did that start with Tony?
Yeah, it did start with Tony. That was all Tony's initiative. And I think it is continuing on. I mean, they've had a rough time. So after Tony passed away, he actually resigned as CEO right before Amazon basically forced him to resign when he was struggling in the months before his death. They had another CEO, but only for a year until that person also resigned. And he was just like not a Tony figure. Now they have another guy that was kind of more of a disciple of Tony. So I think their customer service is going to continue, but I also sort of wonder if at some point Amazon is just going to absorb that brand, because really they bought it for Tony. So I don't know what purpose actually they really have of owning it as a separate brand right now. So yeah.
We still have time for a few other questions. Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, a question about, I guess, besides this book, what has been done to remember and raise awareness of the issue at hand, especially in places where he made an impact, like Las Vegas or any areas where he's lived?
When you say the issue at hand, do you mean like the mental health issues?
Mental
or do
health.
you mean like what?
Yes.
That, I mean, so Zappos, again, they've been in a little bit of a turmoil just because of the CEO changes, and also everyone was still working at home until recently, but they've been really trying to adopt, actually with the help of Jewel and her mental health organization, some like deeper practices. They've fully backed away from that like party atmosphere, right? That was really bad towards the end. I mean, alcohol in the workplace, in my opinion, are never a good idea. But so they backed away from that, and they're doing more sort of like retreat, like mental health day, you know, lecture stuff. Downtown Las Vegas has been a little lost, to be honest. They haven't really recovered from Tony because no one really cared about it like Tony did. So that's just been kind of there. I don't know if developers, part of the reason for that is the estate hasn't settled. So they can't really figure out like what to do with some of the properties down there. However, I would say if you guys are ever in Las Vegas, you should absolutely go there, because Tony built this amazing, it's called Container Park. It's a bunch of containers, like giant metal containers with restaurants and businesses in them. And then out front is this giant praying mantis sculpture from Burning Man. And at night, it shoots fire. I've been to Vegas several times, and it is the craziest thing I've seen. I actually brought my kids, and they were like, what? Like, it's just this crazy, like, mantis thing. So anyway, some of his stuff is still there. It's just a little forlorn.
Any other questions for Kirsten?
I have one. with all your overview of things you've reviewed and checked out, read about, followed up on the last several years, are you seeing any social trends that really scare you?
Oh, that is such a good question. Social, you know what really scares me is social media. I think it's all terrible, honestly. It's like that really worries me. One thing we go into the book too is this trend of, which we still have despite everything happening, this like worship we have of these like famous entrepreneurs, how we like put them on a pedestal. You kind of see that with Elon Musk too, but you saw it with like the Theranos woman that's now going to jail, or the WeWork CEO. These are all like TV shows that are now streaming on Netflix, right? But it's like, we just love to worship these people, and Tony was like no different. So I wish we would back off that a little bit.
I agree. Thank you.
Kirsten, we can't thank you enough for your time. I put the Amazon link to Kirsten's book in the chat. Highly recommend you read it, gift it. It's, again, we think about mental illness maybe for people of rougher socioeconomic backgrounds, but here is a billionaire who had really everything, and really had a spiral downward. So it's a fascinating book. We're going to be making a donation in your honor to the Equitable Food Access in Indianapolis Neighborhoods Initiative,
wow.
which is
Thank you
developing.
so much.
Absolutely, and I think Kelly will be getting you a certificate, which is developing community-driven plans in collaboration to build a more equitable and sustainable food system in our great city. So again, really appreciate your time today. We really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for having me, and please let me know what you think about the book.
Okay, well, we will see everyone soon, and I hope you all have a wonderful week, and go out and buy that book, okay?
Thank you so much for having me.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.